Okay everyone, so now we are ready to start building in some user login and logout functionality. And then we also want to add in certain page restrictions for authenticated users only. So that means that we're going to have a couple of pages that you will only be able to access if you are logged in. So before we get started with that, I want to explain to you the difference between authentication versus authorization. And then I want to show you how the default Django authentication system actually works and give you some examples here. So let's first open up this picture here. I just drew this in Microsoft Paint before the video, and let's start with authentication. So authentication is simply determining who a user is. So we're trying to identify a particular user, and this would typically look like some kind of login form where you would enter your credentials, submit that form, and then we would check against the database for that user, make sure that the username and password match, and then we would have the user's identity. So we want to know who is this user. Now, authorization is simply determining what a user can do on the website. So there's a couple examples of this. One is restricting users to only unauthenticated users. So basically, if you're not logged in, you can visit these 4 pages. And these 2 right here would be restricted only to people that have logged in. We can go one step further and restrict a user based on their role in the website. So let's say we have like a standard user of a website, and then we have some kind of administrator that actually runs the website. So the administrator would probably handle things like user accounts, have access to certain pages, and so on. So authorization basically determines what you can do on the website. So authentication, who is the user? Authorization, what can this user do? So now let's go ahead and try to explain how Django's authorization system actually works. So we're going to start with the admin panel. So remember, we can log into this admin panel. And when we log in, we can refresh the page at any point, and the website still knows who we are. So what happens here? So when we ran our initial migrations, there were a few tables created for us. One of those was a table called sessions. And this sessions table simply stores user sessions. So Django uses sessions by default. We can customize this. But what it does is it creates that table, stores a session ID, and then it also takes that session and it puts it into the browser. So if we go to inspect here, let's go to application. Let's check out our storage here. So let's go into storage and then cookies. And let's go ahead and find the one for this website. So what do we see here? So we see a session ID. So when we log in, this session ID is created in the database and then it is put into our browser. So every time we refresh this page, Django is going to take this session ID from the cookies and it's going to check if there is one in the database and make sure it's not expired, and then allow us to visit the page because everything checks out. So if we log out, look what happens here to the session ID. So if I log out, the session ID now goes away and now I cannot access the page. So I'm going to be prompted to go into the login page. So if I click login, we have a new session ID. That means the session was created in the database and now it's stored here. So if I click on that, this is what it looks like right here. So it's this value. And I can also just log out by deleting it manually like this. So if I refresh, now I'm logged out. So when I click log out, the session simply gets deleted. So now I want to show you what this looks like in the database. So I'm going to pull up pgadmin, which is an interface for a Postgres database. And this is that database table for another Django project. So it's not the one we're using right now. So when we switch to Postgres, we can actually look at this, but we are using SQLite, so we can't actually see the sessions. So in this case, every time a user logs in on my website, I can see the session key, the expiration date, and some session data, probably storing information about that user. So a session is created, and every time we delete a session, it's not going to be deleted from the database. It's just deleted from the cookie, and we just have a record of when people log in and who they are. So it's session-based authentication. I hope that makes sense. So what we're going to do now is build in our own login page because I don't want my users using this Django login form. It's not what Django was built for. This is meant for the admin page, but the authentication system is still the same. Now, long term, we could go to JSON web tokens if we're building out some API or something like that. But for now, let's stick to what Django gives us. So the first thing I want to do is create the login page here. So I want to start with the templates here, and we're going to go into our users app and let's create a login template. So we'll just go to new file here, and we're just going to call this login underscore register. So we're going to handle registration and login in the same template. They are going to be different pages, but we're going to create one template for that. So the first thing I want to do in the template is first, let's just extend the main template. So we still want the navigation bar here. So we'll go into main.html. We've done this a few times. And let's create some block tags here. So we'll just do block content. And then we want to end block here, close that off here. So we'll do end block content. So we're going to start building out a form. So end block content. Okay, so in this template, the first thing I want to do is build out that form. So let's go ahead and start with that form. So let's create the form tags, and we want to set the method here, and this is going to be a post method. So we're logging a user in, we are sending data, and we also want to make sure that that's hidden, so that has to be a post method. And the action, we're just going to configure this right now. So the action is going to point to the URL of login. So we don't have this yet, so once we create it, this will work just fine. So we'll just do login, and that's it. So that's going to be the URL once we create it. So we're going to send post data here. Now for the fields here, let's just create some input fields. Let's close that out. And the first one is going to be just a text field, and this is going to be the username. So specify the name. We need this value to know what field is sending what data. And Django does give us a built-in form, but I would rather build this out by hand so you can see all the details of what's happening here. So the name is simply going to be user name for that field. Let's copy this one, paste this, and this one is going to be a password field. And then the name here is going to be password. So username and password, any standard login form would take this. Now for the third field, this is going to be a submit button. So we'll just do submit, and then we don't need a name. So let's just set the value, and we're just going to say login. So we're telling a user to log in. So to make this a little bit more readable on the front end, we'll just add in some placeholder text here, and we'll just say user name. And then for password, we can just do placeholder, and then we'll just say enter password. So with that, our form also needs a CSRF token. So anytime we're sending a post request, let's go ahead and add in a CSRF underscore token. So we need to send this on every post request. So we have that now, and we're just sending the data to the login route. So let's go into our users app, and let's go into the views now. So within our views, we want to create a view for that login page. And I'm just going to make this a function-based view. So I'm going to call this login page. And do not call this login. So we are going to import a function called login. So make sure that whatever you name it, don't name it just login like that. So in my case, I'm just going to camel case it and call it login page. So in here, we'll just throw in request. We'll return that template. So we'll do render, pass in request into the template, throw in the name. So we'll do users / login underscore register.html. Now we just want to create a route here. So we'll go into the URLs, and let's create this route above everything else here. So I want to separate it from all the other routes just to kind of keep things separate here because it's its own portion, I guess. So in here, we're just going to call this login / and then we can do views.login page. And then the name here will just be login. So login like that. Okay, so we have our URL path, we have our view. And what I want to do is actually go into the navigation bar. So within our root directories templates folder, let's go into the nav bar and add the route here. So inside of that href attribute, let's just do URL here, and we'll just do login. Keep clicking the wrong thing here. So login. Okay, finally got it right. So if I go in here, let's go ahead and refresh that. Let's click login. And here we go. So we see this ugly form right here. And remember, we will style this later. So for now, I just want to focus on the core logic because this concept could be challenging. So let's go back into our view and let's actually process this data. So the first thing I want to do is check if it's a post method. So we'll just do if request.method is equal to post. Let's go ahead and just print out what we're getting. So we'll just do print here, and we'll do request.post. So I'm going to save that. Let's open up the terminal, and I want to see what we're actually getting back. So for the password, I'm just going to type in something random. Let's go ahead and hit login. It doesn't send us anywhere, but we saw the page refresh because We submitted that, so the post data was sent. So here we see a dictionary with our CSRF token. Then we see the username, which is right here. And we see the password that we just sent. So we want to extract this information before we process it. So let's close this out here. And let's first set the username and password. So we'll do username, set that to request.post, and then that's going to be username. So whatever the form fields were, that's what we want to extract it by. Let's copy this right here, paste that, and let's get the password now. So password, and this is going to be password. Okay, so there's going to be a couple of imports that we need to make here. So let's go ahead and go under the render method, and we'll actually first want to import redirect from Django.shortcut. So let's add that because we are going to redirect a user if they're successfully authenticated. Now from here, we're going to do from Django.contrib.auth, and let's just import login and authenticate. So I'll explain what these do as we go along here. So this is why we didn't want to call this view login, because it's going to mix up with this function here. So make sure that's not the same. So in this process, when a user submits their data, we want to output certain errors if things go wrong. So we want to first run a few checks. So the first thing is we want to create a try block here, and we want to make sure that the username even exists in the database. So we'll just say user, and this is going to be set to user.objects.get. So we're running a simple query here, and we're going to say username is equal to user. So we haven't even checked the password yet. We just want to know that this user exists. So for this, I'm going to need to import the built-in user model. So let's go into models.py inside of our users app, and let's just copy this right here. So I'm going to import that above my profile. And if the user does not exist, so if this fails for some reason, we'll just go ahead and for now, we'll just print out username does not exist. So later on, this will be something called a flash message that appears in the template, so a user will know. So we always want to let them know what the actual error was. So we want to know, does this even exist, or maybe they got their credentials wrong. So after that, let's go ahead and set the user variable again. And this is going to be the authenticate function here. So what authenticate's going to do is this will actually take in the username and password, and it will make sure that the password matches the username, and it will return back either the user instance or it's going to return none. So in this case, we're going to set request first. That's the first parameter. Then we're going to pass in the username. So username, and then we throw in the password now. So this basically will query the database. If it finds the user that actually matches the username and password, then it's going to return back that user. So after this, what we want to do is we want to run another check. So what if this fails here? So if it's successful, let's do that first. We'll just do if user is not none. So we basically just invert that. So if the user does exist, so making sure that this is not none, then let's go ahead and log the user in. So we'll just do login, and let's go ahead and throw in the request and the user that we want to log in. So what the login function is going to do is this will create a session for this user in the database. So in that sessions table, then it's also going to get that session, and it's going to add that into our browser's cookies. So this is what officially sets that in the browser, and that's how we know a user is logged in and how they can have their permissions. So if a user successfully logs in, let's go ahead and redirect the user. So we'll just do return redirect, and for now we are just going to send the user to the home page, which is the profile page. Later on, I'm going to clean this up to where a user gets redirected either to the home page or the previous page that they were at, because they may be on a completely different page, like let's say a user account page, and they try to log in, but it got redirected back to the login page, and then when they log in, they want to be sent back to the page that they were currently on. So that's what we're going to add in later, but for now we're going to ignore this. So, or not ignore it, but we're just going to send them to the profile. So we want to create an else statement. So what happens if the user is not none? Well, we know the user exists in the database, or else we would have returned this. If the user does exist in the database, then what we want to do is go ahead and return a message here. And right now they're just going to be print statements. And we're going to say username or password is incorrect. So that just means that part of their search was right. What if they got the username right and the password wrong, or they just got some kind of other username, but the password did match? So we'll just say username or password is incorrect. So that's a message that we'll want to see in the template. So let's save this and see what happens here. So if I go ahead and hit refresh, so the admin panel is going to use the same session-based authentication. So let's just pull up the admin panel. Right now, we are not logged in. So if I go ahead and run this, we were redirected, the user was logged in, and now if I go ahead and refresh the admin panel, we are officially logged in. So that's all we needed to do for that. So let's output some kind of message here that tells us the user was logged in. So what we can actually do here is we will go into our nav bar, and I just want to output the logout button if we're logged in, and then a login button if we're not logged in. So that's how we'll know if a user is actually logged in. So let's go in here and let's just copy this login button and let's duplicate this. So we'll just go ahead and repeat that. And one of these will be logout. So what I'm going to do is first create a condition, and we can actually access the user in our template. So we can access that user object by just doing request.user. So we're just going to create a condition, and I'll go over this a little bit more later, but we're going to do if request. So request right here is the same request object that we can access right here. So if request.user, and this is either going to be the logged in user or it's just going to be set to anonymous users. So if request.user.is_authenticated, can't spell that, so authenticated. So if the user is authenticated, why does that still look weird? Okay, that's a U there. So if the user is authenticated, then what we want to do is output the logout page. So if the user is authenticated, let's just say logout, and we'll add in this functionality soon. And let's just add in an end if statement. So we just want to do end if. Let's close this out. End if. And then we want to put in an else statement. So we'll just do else. And there we go. So if the user is authenticated, let's output the logout button, else output the login button. So this means they are not logged in. So let's go ahead and refresh this. And now we are logged in. So if I click log out, it's not going to do anything right now. It looks like that's actually linked to the login page. So we'll just update that. But if we go into our admin panel, let's go in here. Let's just do admin panel and log out this way. Now if I refresh this, now we see login and sign up. If I go here, now it's log out. So let's do a few things here. Let's first log out the user, and then we also want to restrict the user from seeing this page if they're logged in. So there's no reason why a logged in user should actually see this page. So let's go and add in that logout functionality first. So for this, from django.contrib.auth, we want to import a function called logout. And this is simply going to take in the request and the user, or it's actually going to take in the request and simply delete the session ID. So we're going to create another view now that we logged the user in, and we'll just say logout user. Let's pass in request here, and let's just do return redirect, and we just want to redirect a user, and this will send the user back to log in. So when they log out, they're going to be prompted to log back in. So all this view does is take out the logout view, and the logout view is the easiest method you've ever seen. We just pass in request, and that's going to delete that session. So all we have to do from here is create that path here. So let's just copy this, call this log out, and this will be logout user, and this also is going to be logout. So let's call this login user instead. I feel like we should just stick with the consistency, and for some reason login user, did we not call that? Oh, logout user. So that's not a real one. So log out user. So we'll just modify that, and we're going to call this one login user, and that means that we have to update the view. Okay, so let's go back into the navbar, and basically we're just going to send the user to that page. It doesn't have to be a post request, and in that logout button, we're just going to say log out for the route, and let's see what happens here. So if I go ahead and refresh this, if I click log out, now we are officially logged out, and let's see what happens here. So we saw that button change, so we can see that we were actually logged out. So let's go in the console here, go into application, go into storage, and then cookies. And let's see. So when I log in here, their session is made. Perfect. We see the user session. And when I hit log out, the session is deleted. So login and log out functionality is complete. So let's do a few more things here. So let's restrict a logged in user from seeing this page. So if I go to log in directly, I can still see the page. So let's set a restriction there. We'll go ahead and close out the navbar and the URL here. And we'll go into login user. And before the request.post method, we're simply going to say if request.user.is_authenticated. Had an issue with that word last time. So if the user is authenticated, then just go ahead and send the user to the login page. In this case, we're actually going to send the user to the page that they were on previously. Well, we'll do that in the future, but for now, we're just going to send them to the projects page or profiles. So we'll just do profiles like that. So if the user is authenticated, don't let the user be on here. And there's different ways we can do this. There's decorators, but for now, we'll keep it simple. So we'll do profiles here. That one redirects, and that looks good. So let's test this. So if I try to go to that login page directly, can't see it now. Perfect. So it's stopping me, and that's exactly what we want. So the next thing I want to do is actually restrict a user from seeing certain pages. So let's say a logged in user can see the add project page, but we don't want an unauthenticated user to see this. So we want to block them. So in this case, we're going to log out, and later on we'll actually hide this from the navigation bar. We'll do this just after we block the page. But let's say the user is not logged in and they try to view this page. So we want to stop them here. So let's go ahead and make an import in our views here. And there's different ways of doing this. We can write custom middleware with class-based views. We have mixins for this. But for now, we're just going to use decorators because we have function-based views. So we're just going to go ahead and make an import from Django.contrib. So Django.contrib.auth.decorators. And we are just going to import the login required decorator. So this decorator is simply going to sit above any view that we want to block and basically require authentication for. And there's different types of decorators. I personally like to make my own too, so that's a unique way of doing it. But let's go into, and that's going to be outside of the scope of this tutorial for now. Let's go into the add page here. Okay, so that's actually in our different apps. So let's take this decorator. We can leave the import in the user's app, but for now, let's go into projects, views, scroll up here. Let's make that import really quick. So login required in the projects app now. And we want to block create project. So we'll just add that here. So let's paste it, login required, accidentally blocked that there. So login required now requires that the user is logged in. So what we could do is pass in a parameter and tell the user where to be redirected if they are not logged in. So we'll just do login underscore URL. And we're just going to tell this to send the user to the login page if they are not logged in. So if you try to go to this page, you'll just be prompted to log in. So I want to add that to the create project view, also to the update project view, and the delete project view. So I don't want users going here and deleting a project. So we just want to make sure they are authenticated. So these 3 pages now will now be restricted only to authenticated users. So all we did was take this decorator that we imported, wrapped it around here, and we redirect the user to the login page. So this login required decorator. So let's try this now. So if I try to visit this page, so I'm gonna be unauthenticated right now. Let's try to click on this. I'm sent back to the login page. So you see how it's blocking me. Now, if I try to log in here, let's go ahead and authenticate ourselves and go to this page. Now I can see it. So we just restricted a user from seeing an unauthenticated page or a page that requires authentication. So at this point, I just want to remove this from the navbar and then add in some flash messages. So let's go into that navbar and we will use that same condition. So in the root directories templates folder, navbar.html, let's just do this. So if the user is authenticated, we're going to add in the logout button, and let's just take create project here. and we're going to throw this in this condition. Eventually this link will be completely removed, but for now that should do it. So we put this in the condition, so only if a user is authenticated, they will see that. So we want to hide the link, and we also want to stop the page because somebody could just find that route and make malicious attempts here. So if I log out, now it's gone. If I log in, now it's there. Okay, so flash messages. So let's say we got the username wrong. If I click this, I can't see anything. Nothing occurs here. So I don't know what went wrong. I don't know if my password was incorrect. I don't know if the username was wrong. So I pulled up the Django documentation here, and this is for Django's flash messages. And I believe they use sessions, but basically what they do is they output a one-time message that we can render in our template. And I think it's in session, so basically they just get temporarily stored. And once we view a page, they get removed. So on the next refresh, they just go away. So they're one-time messages that we can see in our template. So let's scroll down here and let's see how to use them. So there is some documentation, and what I'm looking for is how to render them out in the template here and how to add them. So this is how we can actually add a message inside of our views. So before we get to that, I want to pull up this right here. Okay, so here are the messages. So let's first make the import. And then once we do that, we can set the type of message here and then output any kind of actual message to the user. And the user will see this in the template as long as we add one more thing, which is going to be this. So let's go into our views here and let's add the message. So we'll go into our users app now. And inside of the views, let's make the import. So this is going to be from Django, not caps here, I accidentally hit caps. So from Django.contrib import messages. So now that we have messages, what we can do is we can just go ahead and bring this down into the login page. And I want to send this to the user here. So let's go back into the documentation, and this is how we make a message. So I want this to be an error message, so we can just do messages.error, pass in the request, and then the message we want to output. So let's do that. So let's just do messages. So messages.error, so the type of message, and then we throw in request here, and then a comma there. So this is what's going to be added, I believe, to the sessions. I just need to read up the documentation, but the details at this point do not matter. So I'm going to bring that here. And then if I go down to this section, I also want to print out this message. So let's go ahead and take all of this and put that there. So the error message here will say username or password is incorrect, and this one will say username does not exist. So if I go ahead and go into the documentation, how do we input that into the template? So we're going to run a condition, and we're going to say if messages. So if there are any messages, go ahead and loop through the messages and output them in our template. So let's just copy all of this, and we are going to style this in the final video where we style the login form. But for now, let's go in here, and we're going to go into our templates. So not in projects, let's go into our root directory in main.html. And let's just put this under our navbar because there are different cases where we may need these, and we always want flash messages to appear in the same place. So later on, when a user is successfully created, we want to output a message. When something else happens, we always want to be able to use these. So let's actually use one more message. Let's take this right here and let's paste this into the logout message. And let's just say user was successfully logged out. So user was logged out. Okay, so let's test these. So if I go ahead and refresh this, if I log in and I log out, user was logged out. So if I refresh that, now the message goes away. Now, what if I get the username incorrect? So the username does not exist, or the username password is incorrect. So if I go ahead and refresh that again, let's mess up the password. Username or password is incorrect. So those are our flash messages, and we will get to styling those later. But that's it for this video. In the next one, we're going to start building in some registration. So we want to have an option to register a user, to create new users, and then we'll go into styling the actual flash messages and the user form.